everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ashley and I'm an architect in Ontario, and in this video I'm going to be talking about why you don't need to become a licensed architect. Now, I talk about the licensure process on this channel quite a bit, and I wanted to take a moment to also mention that you don't always need to get a license. It's not necessarily a path for everyone. So I want to shed some light on what you can do without a license in the industry. So if you're curious, let's get started. Now, I want to preface that there are advantages on both sides of becoming a licensed architect and deciding not to get licensed either. Now, again, this depends on your personal journey, what you want to get out of it, and your journey this far as well. So it's important to evaluate what fits best for yourself, because there's no right or wrong answer here. This really comes down to you as an individual and what works best for you. Now, when I started in architecture, I honestly was not thinking about getting licensed. It eventually worked out that way. And of course, if you're curious about the reasonings why I decided to get my license, let me know down in the comments if you'd be interested in hearing my reasonings of becoming a licensed architect. I eventually decided to go that route, but at the beginning, it wasn't anything that I was interested in. I talk about licensure and the process of becoming an architect a lot in this channel. And so I wanted to take a minute as well to shed some light that you don't need to have your license in order to work at an architectural practice. So you can get started in the industry without having a license. And I just want to put it out there so that you know that there is this option. And I don't want people to feel like the only way in architecture is to become a licensed architect. That's not necessarily true. There's so many things that you can do with an architecture degree, and I'll do that on a separate video. I'll talk about the different paths and career paths that you can go into with an architecture degree. But if you are thinking about working in the industry, you don't need to have a license. Now, of course, there are advantages and opportunities by getting a license, and I can talk about those in a separate video if you are interested. But in this video, I want to focus on the opportunities of not having a license and what you can do in that industry. Now, I'm going to be talking about the rules and policies within Ontario because I am in Ontario and I'm a part of the OAA, the Ontario Association of Architects. So I'm more familiar with the policies and the procedures in Ontario. So I would recommend, if you're outside of Ontario, to check with your local jurisdiction for the rules and policies. But in Ontario, if you want to have your own practice, yes, you need to have your own license. You need to be a licensed architect to do so. And you need to have a certificate of practice. So if you're working as a non-architect, you would need to work under another architect that's licensed through the local jurisdiction, and they would need to hold a certificate of practice. So under that architect and under that certificate of practice, anyone could work under that umbrella. Licensed architects, technologists, and non-licensed designers, so project managers, and so on. And so you don't need to be licensed when you're working under another architect and another certificate of practice. And within that practice, without a license, you can work as a project manager, as an assistant to the architect, as a designer, and so on. And you would work alongside that architect who would be supervising and managing the practice. And as you're working in that practice, you can also grow within that company and that practice without having a license. So what do I mean by that is that a lot of practices have associates, associate principals, principals, and so on. And each practice has a different type of hierarchy in their practice. So without a license, you can still in that practice have leadership roles and be promoted to different types of leadership roles within that company without holding a license. Now, to become a partner or a principal in that company, you can still, believe it or not, at least in Ontario, you can still become a partner in that company, But it's important to note that there is a percentage of that company needs to be licensed architects or licensed engineers, for example. So it has to be made out of a higher percentage of licensed individuals, and they need to hold also financially more shares and so on. And if you're interested in more of the details of a certificate of practice, let me know in the comments and I can get into the details and the particulars of it. That means that you could be a partner in that company without a license. Now, some companies and firms and practices might encourage you to get your license, but it's not really a necessary in order to work in the industry. And so I just want to share that information with you and provide that insight to you that if you are working under another practice, under another architect, you don't need to have a license. Now, if you do want to go out on your own and practice, that's a whole different story. You need to be a licensed architect to do that, and to sign on drawings and to put stamps on them, you would need to have a license. You could get your building code identification number, and you can do smaller type of buildings like houses and put a stamp on that. But again, you still have to write tests for that, and you have to get a stamp as well. So that being said, you can still work if you don't have a license at all, then you can still work under an architect and under that practice. So, and I want to also mention that again, getting your license is a journey and there's no rush to it. So you can work in the industry for a few years and then decide a bit later on that you do want to get your license, and you can start then collecting your experience. So if you meet all the educational requirements, you can start doing your internship and so on. So don't feel rushed to make a decision right away that you need to get your license, because it's not necessarily the case. There's no rush, there's no race here to becoming a licensed architect. And to be honest, it took me some time to decide to make that decision. And once I made the decision that I wanted to pursue my license, it took another few years to collect the experience and to meet all the requirements in order to become an architect. And I know a lot of colleagues and friends in the industry that have decided that they don't want to go through all that trouble, because in the end, what they want to get out of career-wise, they can do without a license. If you want to learn more about my journey into architecture and becoming an architect, you can check out this video here, and I hope to see you on the next video. Until then, bye!